On August 19, 1942, in the thick jungle close to Taiview Point on Guadalcanal, 2nd Lieutenant Genjiro Imi of the 8th Independent Anti-Tank Gun Company wrote in his journal about the disbelief many Japanese troops felt when they faced the Americans. Pushing through the dense interlocking palm branches and tangling vines, both Imi and 916 of Colonel Kona Ichiki's unit had just disembarked from destroyers, finishing a nighttime landing that Japanese leaders assumed would initiate the retaking of Henderson Field. Commanders had told them that perhaps 2,000 American soldiers awaited them, men thought to be poorly disciplined, easily startled, and weakened by pampered lives. Even Colonel Ichiki himself ignored suggestions to delay for additional troops. "These are Americans," he declared to his staff. "We will drive them into the sea before the day breaks." Yet none of these soldiers seasoned from campaigns in China and Southeast Asia realized what unprecedented challenge was about to confront the Imperial Japanese Army. It was not just defeat, something unimaginable to men who had only known victory since 1937, but the total destruction of every tactical belief, every strategic plan, and every ideological conviction that shaped Japanese military doctrine. The jungle would now act as an ally to the Americans. The night, once the domain of Japanese forces, turned against them, and the overwhelming edge in equipment, unity, and sheer firepower would dismantle the myth of Japanese dominance in hand-to-hand fighting. This shift started 2 weeks prior, on August 7, when 11,000 troops from the United States Marine 1st Division hit the shores at Lunga Point. General Alexander Vandegrift's Marines were carrying out Operation Watchtower, the opening American offensive of the Pacific Theater. What appeared to be a simple mission on paper, capture the almost completed Japanese airstrip, set up a perimeter, and hold out until backup arrived, would quickly prove to be a fight for survival, the most drawn-out and savage struggle endured by the Marine Corps to that time. Set in conditions would push human tenacity to its extremes. Guadalcanal itself might have been mistaken for paradise, but it was truly an inferno. The island runs 90 miles long and 25 miles wide, with a central spine of mountains towering up to 8,000 feet into endless mist. The coastal area surrounding Henderson Field was a narrow belt of kanai grass, marsh, and jungle so dense that seeing more than a few feet was impossible. The stifling heat and nearly constant humidity, never below 90%, made things worse. Swarms of mosquitoes hung in such thick clouds that the men sometimes breathed them in. The streams and rivers, pristine looking from aerial photos, were actually infested with disease and parasites. Illnesses like malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, and tropical ulcers would incapacitate far more men than enemy bullets or shells. Yet when the Marines advanced on the airfield that first morning, resistance was almost non-existent. The 2,200 Japanese laborers and 600 Navy troops vanished into the forest, leaving behind their tools, rations, and, most importantly, the airstrip itself. As darkness fell on August 8, American engineers were already hard at work finishing the runway. It was soon designated Henderson Field, in memory of Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine pilot killed in the Midway Battle. Within a matter of days, the first planes landed, and the site started to be known as the Cactus Air Force in later historical accounts. The Japanese hit back quickly, causing immense losses to the American naval contingent. On the night of August 9, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, at the head of 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer, slipped through the night undetected and struck with devastating surprise. The ensuing battle around Savo Island resulted in the worst defeat the United States Navy had ever sustained. In less than 60 minutes, the USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and the British HMS Canberra were all sunk. Over 1,000 men lost their lives in the burning water. The remaining Allied ships withdrew to sea, taking away with them most of the vital materiel that had not made it ashore. The Marines found themselves alone, isolated, confronted by growing enemy numbers, and having to make do with barely half the gear and provisions needed. What Japanese leaders failed to comprehend in early August was that the fate of the campaign revolved around Henderson Field. Whoever commanded the airfield dictated movement in the nearby waters throughout the daytime. With planes flying from Henderson, every Japanese ship within 200 miles was vulnerable to attack. This solitary fact shaped how the conflict would unfold. The Japanese controlled the night, bringing in soldiers and equipment by high-speed destroyer runs called the Tokyo Express. But with sunrise, the skies belonged entirely to American air forces. This urgent strategic reality required Japan to seize Henderson Field immediately before American troops could entrench. Imperial General Headquarters handed this mission to Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake's 17th Army, then stationed at Rabaul. Hyakutake had access to only modest forces. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi commanded the 35th Infantry Brigade, which was located at Palau. The 4th Infantry Regiment remained in the Philippines. The nearest available troops belonged to Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment, which had been based close to Guam. This regiment was initially meant for the Midway operation, which was cancelled following the naval defeat in June. Colonel Kona Ichiki, an instructor at the infantry school, was renowned for his skills as a top-notch tactician. He also had a reputation for impulsiveness and an unshakable belief in Japanese fighting spirit over American material strength. Before he set out from Churuk heading to Guadalcanal, Ichiki was given explicit instructions to wait for the remainder of his regiment prior to attempting to recapture the airfield. However, Ichiki held American soldiers in low regard. He had pored over reports from China, the Philippines, and every front where Japanese forces faced Western units. According to him, these troops lacked discipline. They would crack under stress. They could not compete with Japanese fighters in close-quarters engagements. On the night of August 18, 6 destroyers transported 917 personnel from Ichiki's initial detachment to Tyu Point, which lay 15 miles east of the American defenses. Their landing was carried out without incident and escaped notice from the Americans. Immediately, Ichiki dispatched scouting patrols to gather information on enemy strength and defensive layouts. This was a standard tactical action that would ultimately prove deadly. On August 19, a patrol from Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, led by Captain Charles Brush, progressed along the coast road heading towards Kohi Point when they came upon Japanese troops. A brief and savage firefight ensued as the two sides clashed. The Marines killed 31 Japanese and seized paperwork that confirmed a sizable Japanese presence nearby. Even more critically, the captured documents revealed that the Japanese grossly underestimated the actual strength of the Americans. Captain Brush quickly returned to the defensive lines carrying this vital intelligence. General Vandergrift grasped the situation immediately. A Japanese assault was imminent, most likely from the eastern direction. He instructed Colonel Clifton Cates to reinforce the defenses at the sandbar by the mouth of the river the Marines called the Tenaru. Although it was truly the Ilu River, the error in naming would persist in all later reports. Cates placed Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines along the riverbank and situated machine guns in overlapping fields of fire across the sandbar. What followed soon became legendary as one of the Marine Corps' most lopsided victories. Colonel Ichiki, rather than waiting for either results from his missing patrol or additional troops, chose to launch an attack at once. During the night of August 20 and into the morning of August 21, he gave orders for a direct frontal assault over the sandbar. Japanese military principles emphasized the supremacy of spirit and bold night offensives to overwhelm enemy firepower. Ichiki was convinced his experienced men could penetrate the American lines through sheer courage and close-quarters fighting, where Japanese excelled with bayonets and grenades. Just past midnight, Jacob Buza, a Solomon Island scout who had fled Japanese captivity after enduring torture for several hours, arrived at Marine lines to warn them. The Japanese were approaching. Moments afterward, the offensive was launched. Hundreds of Japanese raced over the sandbar, shouting war cries, shooting rifles, and tossing grenades. They ran straight into a meticulously arranged killing zone established by the Marines. The M1917A1 Browning water-cooled machine guns unleashed their fire. These devices, perfected in World War I, were the unsung backbone of the Marine arsenal. Each one was capable of firing 600 rounds per minute nonstop as long as the water in the jacket was maintained. Marines had sighted these weapons in such mutually supportive positions that every part of the sandbar was covered. The .30 caliber bullets cut through Japanese troops in successive waves. Those who succeeded in crossing the sandbar encountered 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds, which were essentially oversized shotgun rounds that shredded flesh. The onslaught lasted for hours. Repeated waves of Japanese charged into the machine gun crossfire. Some reached the Marines' positions and engaged in brutal hand-to-hand fighting. Marines defended themselves with rifles, bayonets, sidearms, fists, and whatever else was at hand. Still, the carefully prepared defense held firm. The overlapping fields of fire made a Japanese breach impossible. As daylight neared, the offensive by Colonel Ichiki had been completely stopped. More than 800 of his soldiers were dead or fatally wounded on the sandbar and in the shallow waters nearby. Morning brought no rescue for those Japanese left alive. General Vandergrift ordered a push using parts of the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. 5 M3 Stuart light tanks rolled across the sandbar and systematically hunted Japanese troops hiding among the coconut trees. War correspondent Richard Trigascus, observing from the Marines' lines, recounted what he saw. It was striking to watch them move among the woods, swiveling, turning about, spitting out long bursts of yellow fire. No one realized just how many Japanese remained in the grove. Group upon group were flushed out and gunned down by the canister rounds from the tanks. By midday on August 21, the Battle of Tenaru concluded. Out of the 917 Japanese who came ashore at Tyu Point, around 800 had been killed. About 128 survivors, mostly support personnel who had stayed closer to the landing point, dispersed into the jungle. They later radioed the 17th Army headquarters to report the catastrophe. Among those killed was Colonel Ichiki himself, though there were conflicting reports regarding the manner of his death. The official Japanese account maintained that he burned his regimental banners and performed ritual suicide. Other witnesses claimed he perished while leading a final charge. Marine losses were roughly 40 dead and wounded. The effect on the surviving Japanese was psychologically shattering. Documents captured and testimonies given after the war disclosed the profound shock felt upon discovering that an entire regiment had been wiped out in one night. The Americans had not engaged following expectations set by Japanese military doctrine. They did not succumb to panic during the nocturnal assault. They did not falter when confronted by screaming attackers. Rather, they waited within fortified sites, let the Japanese enter predetermined killing grounds, and methodically annihilated them with focused firepower. The greatest shock came in analyzing seized equipment and surveying the area of battle. The Americans enjoyed a material abundance that Japanese intelligence had utterly underestimated. The Browning machine guns operated flawlessly, never overheating beyond specification, never jamming due to insufficient upkeep or a lack of spare components. Each Marine seemed to carry a greater quantity of ammunition than an entire Japanese squad possessed. The Marines' available artillery support surpassed anything the Japanese forces could bring to the field. Additionally, the synergy between infantry, artillery, and naval gunfire from offshore vessels demonstrated an integrated form of destruction the Japanese had never previously faced. In the days following the calamity at Tenaru, additional Japanese reinforcements were already en route to Guadalcanal. Admiral Isaraku Yamamoto coordinated a vast naval operation to back the next attempt at reclaiming Henderson Field. 3 slow-moving transports departed Truk on August 16, bearing the remaining 1,400 soldiers from Ichiki's regiment along with 500 naval marines. Following the naval clash at the Eastern Solomons, which left one transport heavily damaged, Japanese leadership opted to discard the use of these slow ships entirely. Instead, they shifted to utilizing destroyers for what became called Tokyo Express runs. From August 29 to September 4, multiple destroyers and small cruisers landed nearly 5,000 troops from Major General Kawaguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade at Taivyu Point. The Tokyo Express proved highly effective for moving personnel. Destroyers completed the round trip from the Shortland Islands to Guadalcanal within a single night, reducing their vulnerability to American air raids. However, this approach suffered from a crucial flaw. Heavy weapons could not be carried in this manner. Cannons, tanks, trucks, and even essentials like food and ammunition were left behind. This logistical limitation would ultimately ensure the failure of every Japanese push on Guadalcanal. Soldiers arrived with only their personal gear. They relied upon scavenging and any supplies that could be slipped past American lines. As the battle continued, Japanese forces would have to contend not only with American weapons but also increasing hunger. General Kawaguchi scheduled September 12 as the date for the strike on Henderson Field. His strategy proposed a three-pronged offensive. One detachment would attack from the west along the shoreline. Another would move in from the south, piercing thick jungle to hit the spot Japanese intelligence judged the weakest in American fortifications. Kawaguchi himself would command the central effort from the south, advancing along an inland ridge overlooking Henderson Field. What Kawaguchi did not realize was that Marine intelligence had already designated this ridge as the most probable axis of assault. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, the commander of the 1st Raider Battalion, carried out a raid on Tazumoko village on September 8 and uncovered enormous supply caches, demonstrating that a significant Japanese force was gathering in the vicinity. Edson immediately discerned the Japanese scheme. They would advance from the south employing the ridge. Edson asked for permission to construct a defensive line right on the ridge. General Vandergrift gave consent. On September 10 and 11, Edson stationed about 840 Marines from his Raider Group and the 1st Parachute Battalion along the ridge. He selected defensive emplacements with the same thoroughness as had been shown at Tenaru. Machine guns were arranged to cross their fire. Mortar teams registered likely avenues of approach. The 11th Marines Artillery plotted their defensive barrages. Each terrain and fire support advantage was carefully measured and readied. The ridge consisted of a narrow coral outcrop roughly 1,000 meters long, made up of 3 separate hills covered with kanai grass and sparse trees. Steep ravines lined both sides, thickly robed in forest and nearly impossible to traverse in places. It proved to be ideal ground for a night action by infiltrating infantry. Yet, if well defended, it was also a deadly trap. On September 12 after nightfall, Kawaguchi's commanders launched their offensive. Unlike Ichiki's direct assault, this was a more complex operation. Japanese soldiers slipped through the ravines flanking the ridge, seeking to encircle American positions. Small groups felt around for gaps. Once identified, larger forces massed to try to exploit them. The fighting was brutal and disorganized. In the darkness, sometimes Marines fought at close quarters with Japanese troops who had crept within grenades' reach, but the defensive measures held firm. When Japanese soldiers gathered to force a breach, Marine mortars and artillery devastated them. The 11th Marines lobbed over 2,000 rounds during the night, placing explosive shells so near Marine foxholes that flying fragments wounded friendly troops. Machine gun teams kept firing until their barrels shone red-hot in the night. Individual Marines engaged the enemy with rifles, pistols, blades, shovels, anything they could use. Sergeant Major Jacob Bayer, the same scout who had forewarned of the Tenaru incursion, moved through the defensive lines, rallying Marines and pointing out Japanese infiltration paths. Sergeant John Basselwan occupied a key machine gun post that became vital for the defense. After his gun team had been killed or injured, Basselwan continued firing alone, turning back repeated waves of Japanese attacks. For his actions that night, he would later be awarded the Medal of Honor. 2 Marines obtained the Medal of Honor for their actions at Edson's Ridge and 19 others received the Navy Cross. When the sun rose on September 13, the Japanese assault had not succeeded in breaking through, but Kawaguchi still had additional men and was ready for another attempt the next night. Edson pulled his units back to the ridge's center, consolidating his lines. General Vandergrift dispatched additional troops, raising the defending force to around 2,500 men. The Japanese would assault once more, but this time the Marines were prepared with even more fortified positions and a greater concentration of firepower. The combat on the second night was even fiercer than on the first. Kawaguchi committed his remaining men to urgent assaults, trying to break through before American reinforcements could make the line unassailable. Japanese troops attacked in waves, perishing by the hundreds under machine gun fire. A few of these offensives advanced to within 50 yards of Edson's command post before being repelled. At one stage, matters became so dire that Edson personally seized a rifle and joined the defensive line. Despite this, American firepower and careful planning once again won the day. When dawn broke on September 14, Kawaguchi's attack had utterly disintegrated. Japanese losses were immense. Around 830 to 850 Japanese were killed in the vicinity of Edson's Ridge. The Marines suffered about 104 dead and more than 200 wounded, between the Raider and Parachute battalions. The ridge afterwards named Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge witnessed the proof of how effective American defensive tactics could be. For the Japanese survivors, this battle brought another deep shock to their ideas about warfare. Captured diaries and reports after the war repeatedly revealed the same lesson. The Japanese believed they would be facing other infantry at night, where their training and morale would secure victory. Instead, they confronted a concentration of artillery, mortars, and machine guns with an accuracy beyond their own capabilities. The American leadership knew when the Japanese would attack. They planned killing fields. They waited for the Japanese troops to enter them. Then, using coordinated supporting fire, they annihilated the attackers. The engagements at Tenaru and Bloody Ridge set patterns that would be seen again throughout the Guadalcanal campaign. Japanese units would assault relying on bravery, night movements, and proficiency in close-quarters combat. American defenders would answer with massive firepower, well-organized combined arms tactics, and fortifications designed to emphasize their strengths. The results became easy to anticipate. Japanese forces would take enormous losses. American casualties, though significant, would remain tolerable. Still, statistics cannot express the true horror of jungle combat on Guadalcanal. The island's environment itself became a deadly adversary. Malaria struck nearly everyone who stayed longer than a couple of weeks. By December 1942, the 1st Marine Division reported over 8,000 cases of malaria. Tropical illnesses incapacitated nearly 2/3 of the division. Suffering from dysentery was widespread. Men endured fungal diseases that destroyed tissue. Jungle rot caused open wounds that would not close in the steamy climate. Dental problems persisted without treatment, causing abscesses and spreading infections. The Japanese fared even worse. From the outset, their supply situation meant insufficient food. Soldiers were allotted field rations, but the Tokyo Express seldom managed to deliver a full share. Men survived on what they could gather locally, with occasional rice supplies that proved barely sufficient. Chronic hunger became a daily ordeal. Medicines were almost entirely absent. Supplies of quinine for malaria defense were quickly depleted and rarely replenished. Many wounded died from infections that routine treatment could have healed. Seized Japanese papers later in the operation described the dreadful situation. One medical officer's note from late October recorded that more than 60% of the 17th Army's soldiers on Guadalcanal were out of action due to illness or a lack of food. Their combat readiness fell to as little as 30% of their established numbers. 50 deaths per day became common, mainly from starvation and disease instead of battle injuries. American logistics benefited from supply ships, protected by Henderson Field's aircraft in the daytime, that brought regular shipments of food, ammunition, medical gear, and replacement materiel. There were some shortages, most notably during August and early September after setbacks at sea left Marines temporarily isolated, But these problems did not last. By October, deliveries were consistent. Marines consumed canned provisions that, while unappealing, provided enough energy and nutrients. Ammunition was so available that machine gunners could use up barrels and ask for replacements without worry. Medical treatment included mobile hospitals able to perform surgery, plasma for transfusions, sulfa drugs to fight infection, and ultimately the evacuation of critical cases to hospitals in the rear. The Japanese supply effort relied on whatever could be moved on destroyer decks or slipped through American lines. Soldiers learned to stretch a single rice ball throughout the day. Ammunition had to be used so sparingly that fire was reserved solely for situations of absolute necessity. Medical support meant a bandage in fortunate circumstances, crude amputation without anesthetic for the unlucky, or death if the wound turned septic. Badly injured soldiers frequently received grenades and were left behind with instructions to take their own lives, rather than slow their comrades down or risk falling into American hands.